the unifying theme, I think, for action scenes, and actually, I think action scenes can be really grouped with any climactic scenes to some extent. It depends on the type of action scene. So, some can be less climactic than others, but like even in comparison to like a really climactic dialogue scene, I think there are a lot of similarities. The unifying theme between all of them are stakes, and that's what, in my opinion, in any medium, is the difference between a good action scene and one that is just kind of like a placeholder.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 58 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, my dear MJ Kuhn. How are you, MJ?
I am great. How are you?
Doing very well. And for anyone who wants to support MJ, you can pick up her amazing debut novel, Among Thieves. If you like found families and people fucking each other over.
Fucking each other over. To be clear, there's no spice.
Not
They're
fucking
not
each other.
Fucking each other.
This is the best plug ever. Okay. They're not fucking each other, but if you like people who fuck each other over, this one's for you.
You almost got book talk really excited for a second there, and then we lost.
Oh, yeah. All the romance fans are like, ooh, thieves fucking? Let's go for it.
But no,
this is
sadly.
a good start to an episode. And the sequel, Thick as Thieves, is out on July 25th, so you can go support MJ, pre-order that, pick up the original book. As well, a quick note for anyone who is listening or watching, the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are now live, so check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel, where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now, joining us once again is the enigmatic Alexander Darwin, author of the Combat Codes. Welcome back, Alex. How are you?
Hello, my friends.
Hello.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks, bud. A heads up, this is part 2 of our 2-part chat with Alex, so I recommend checking out part 1 to get to know him better. Today, though, we ain't pulling no punches. We're doing a mini-masterclass on writing action scenes. So just to kick things off, Alex, what are some of your favorite action sequences in fiction? And do you remember the first one to grip you by the throat and not let go? You can even throw in some movie and TV ones as well.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the books that got me into science fiction and fantasy, or rather one of the series, was the Dark Elf trilogy by R.A. Salvatore. And Drist Do'Urden, the Dark Elf, wielded 2 scimitars, and that really, really, really was what I fell in love with. Just like the most R.A. Salvatore, he writes some really badass action scenes. If you ever want to read some really enthralling action scenes with stakes, and we could talk a little bit about that, read R.A. Salvatore. I know he's written so many books, but Dark Elf trilogy, Icewind Dale trilogy have some of the best action scenes written. As far as film and TV, a show that is currently in its 2nd season and has some of the best action sequences that I've seen is on HBO Max. It's called Warrior. And it takes place in the turn of the 19th century San Francisco, and it's like the warring Chinese gangs and Irish gangs. It's got some really, really good action sequences. It was actually the concept of it was penned by Bruce Lee a long time ago, prior to his passing, and his daughter Shannon is the executive producer on it.
Yeah, Fonda and I
highly recommend that.
Have talked about that show a few times, and it's super good. Like the main character is just, I can't remember the name of the actor, but he's like half Japanese, half American, but his like choreography is phenomenal throughout that whole show.
No, it's a really good show, and I feel like it's it just got renewed for its third season, which comes out in June. I feel like it's underappreciated, but it's really good. I highly recommend that.
Yeah,
and
it's got
of course,
good gangster vibes.
Yeah, there's some hatchets. There's some hatchet battles, but it's a lot of unarmed.
MJ, I know you love your hatchets.
There you go. Right, I know.
Right?
It's got some really good
hatchets
really good
tattooed on my body, so
yeah.
I'm into it. Yeah, that's awesome. I think a good action scene can just like, I don't know, get you sucked in and like get your heart pounding. And so I'm just curious, why do you think action scenes are so integral to fictional stories? And then I also feel like modern fiction is gravitating more towards action oriented versus kind of a more slower, more ponderous type of narrative. I'm just curious about your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And I think really the unifying theme, I think for action scenes, and actually I think action scenes can be really grouped with any climactic scenes to some extent. It depends on the type of action scene. So, some can be less climactic than others, but like even in comparison to like a really climactic dialogue scene, I think there are a lot of similarities. I actually, even if you don't have dialogue in an action scene, I mean, you can have dialogue, but it could come off a little corny, the type of like Princess Bride type dialogue, which is a fantastic, by the way, another fantastic action
First
scene.
First thing I just thought of.
One of the best. Yeah. But I feel like in fiction, it's hard to pull off dialogue in an action scene, but I do think action scenes and dialogue, they follow when done well, follow a similar cadence. But I think the unifying theme between all of them are stakes. And that's what, in my opinion, in any medium, is the difference between a good action scene and one that is just kind of like a placeholder. Because you see a lot, especially, no knock on Marvel movies or a lot of big blockbuster action films, but I just feel like so many of those, of course, they're really fun, but the reason a lot of those action scenes fall flat is just like a lack of stakes. Like the classic example would be like like in Star Wars, the classic Hall laser fight blaster scene where there's just like stormtroopers are just blasting, but first of all, the blasters don't even do anything. They're just like lasers.
They have shitty aim too.
It's just there almost as like an environmental background. Like, and that is not, in my opinion, even really an action scene. And that's kind of like moving that direction, I think, is where a lot of readers and viewers lose faith in action scenes as an actual vehicle to progress the plot and make for a better overall narrative. I think those sort of scenes, and you don't see it quite as much in fiction because it can be really awkward writing an action scene like that in fiction. And you realize it really quickly, like, why is this even here? Like, it's literally just, like in the background, there's no stakes, there's no emotional stakes or physical stakes, which obviously are closely intertwined. If you care about the characters, physical stakes are emotional stakes. So I think that's really the primary focus for me as a viewer, as a reader, if I'm kind of looking at an action scene and asking myself, why was that awesome? I think actually a show I really love is Andor, which is, in the Star Wars universe. And I was just thinking about, why did those action scenes, which are the same, have the same tools, the same blasters, the same, like, why did those hit so much harder? Is because there's stakes. Like, they showed right off the bat, like, one of the characters got shot with a blaster and it blasted a hole through them, as opposed to just like flying everywhere. And you know, of course, again, that's physical stakes, but there were emotional stakes. You know, caring about the characters behind that. So I think, you know, that's a very good example. I'm so happy that, you know, the creators of Andor were able to like take such a common trope of those battles and make something, just show how it can be done.
Stupid ricocheting lasers that don't do anything.
Right. And what is it about the stormtrooper? Was it like a meme, like the stormtrooper armor? Like what does it actually do?
Exactly.
Like,
Right. It doesn't stop anything, and it doesn't camouflage. What is it?
Yeah.
But you spoke a lot about movies and TV, but also kind of like this difference between books and what people can see on screen. Do you feel like that a lot of readers might also be consuming more movies and TV shows at the same time, and that might affect the kinds of books that they want to read? And then at the same time, like, what do you see on screen? You've already mentioned this a bit, like removing the stakes from it, things kind of fall flat. Are there any other things that you see filmmakers or TV producers or anyone in that kind of arena get wrong about action scenes?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to judge because I don't understand you know, filmmaking in the way that I understand writing, and it's just like, obviously storytelling is storytelling, but it's just such a more, of course, visual medium, so that there's limitations and there's advantages. As far as like an advantage of fiction writing is of course the ability, especially in action scenes, to get into characters' heads. And that's what I really like to do in my action scenes, both to like put a cadence to, because you really can't just write just act. If you write an action scene, it's just pure action. It's just will pass. It won't have any impact. You really need to pace it and break the actual physical action up with, again, you could use dialogue. That can be fairly difficult depending, I mean, of course, depending on the scene. Depending on the scene, it could be easy. But what I really like to do is get inside characters' heads, and that, again, that is the main goal of that, is to establish stakes. And then I think, as from a visual medium like film or television, that's a disadvantage because, of course, in most cases, you cannot get inside the character's head, so they have to work around that. And of course, they have the ability to have you know, very cinematic scenes, but I think actually that can often lead. That's where you end up with scenes that don't have any impact in film or TV, because they're focusing too much on the overall cinematic. They're like using that tool too much. It's like their special powers. They can, you know, zoom out and show the entire battlefield and all the grandeur and, you know, the explosions, depending on it. And like, I feel like when they rely too heavily on that, it just becomes like gobbledygook. Like, it's just like, wow, you know, we've all watched those movies, and it's fun, and that's what sells. I'm not arguing against like what makes a good movie, because everyone likes different things, but like, for me personally, like, that's where it really loses me, because it's just like, okay, this is cool, it's cool effects, but it's just
kind of like turn your brain off, not have to pay too much attention to it, and it's like visual, you know, like schizophrenia, just like, yeah, here's all this shit for your eyes to absorb.
Yeah,
and then again, you lose the stakes. You lose focus on what actually they're fighting for. Like, and that's why the ones that do well, they have those cool effects, and then they go into their head, able to head hop in some sense, go into the character's perspective in one way or another.
Yeah.
So that's one of the advantages, I feel like you've said, about the written format versus on screen. I'm curious, it's like a two-part question. First of all, if you see any like drawbacks or like specific challenges to not having that visual component, like that make it more challenging to write the action sequence versus show it. And then my second question is, as a writer that has no combat experience, like, what do you see writers get wrong? Like, when you're reading, what kinds of things just make you go, eye roll?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I want to preface it with like I do. For example, when I'm watching, like my wife will kill me when I'm watching like a show with her because I can be that person that's like, that would never happen in real life. But like at the same time, in retrospect, that can both be very annoying. I realize, and also realism, like what I sometimes will focus on as a martial artist, and what I think one of the strengths of combat codes is realism, but that by no means is any constraint either on a writer that has zero combat experience or on a writer that is writing in, like most of us do, in some fantastical world where there's the realism really has to be within the constraints of the world. And that's just like character personalities. When you lose, when a TV show or a book loses us, it's because a character has broken from that realm of possibility, not in a way that's constructive that the author has planned. It's just like, no, that wouldn't happen. The same would go for a combat scene that's written when you're just breaking that wall within the world and the constraints you've set there, and that, breaking beyond the realm of possibility within the world or magic system or combat system that you've created. So you just have to be faithful. And this is a common theme not only with action sequences but with any of world building, that you have to just be faithful within the system that you've set up.
Yeah, I like that, because it's like, MJ, you already said that I don't have any like combat experience, that kind of thing. I feel like this believability kind of term is it's a bit nebulous and is tricky when it comes to things like sci-fi and fantasy. It's like, you said about being consistent to the system that you set up. But MJ, I want to get your take on this too, in terms of like, how might writers who have no combat experience write action scenes that are not necessarily believable, but fitting for the world that they create, and believable within the context of the world for the readers to immerse themselves into an action scene?
Yeah, I mean, my trick is I keep my action scenes as short as possible. I mean, and, and part of that is that I don't, you know, have the experience to really go into the nitty gritty of every single hit. But also, I don't know. I feel like for the stories that I've written so far, at least, it makes more sense to um dive into what the character is experiencing during the scene. So maybe I focus more on that than on the nitty-gritty of the fight, but also research. Like, you know what I mean? I felt like if you have no combat experience, which I'm like looking into figuring out how to get some training in sword fighting. I was talking to CL Clark about how they got into it, and like I want to learn. But in the meantime, it's just like reading a lot of documents and like watching a lot of YouTube videos and like seeing how the weapons that they're using move and stuff like that. That's my only advice. That's all I got.
Yeah, Alex, what about you? Because it's like, obviously you have the martial arts background, but then like a knife fight or something
Right.
that you probably don't have actual experience in. It's like, we can't all be Christian Cameron or like Ed McDonald, have our medieval HEMA professional backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. But like, do you approach it from like a similar kind of angle as
Yeah.
MJ?
Yeah, I actually think to some extent, having combat experience can actually work in any arena. Whether you could have served in the military or be a martial artist or be a HEMA expert in swordsmanship or kendo with Japanese like katana, but I think that can work against you, especially as a neophyte writer, where you will have the tendency, and I definitely had to overcome this, to like way over describe things. And and again, especially with written word, you can really lose readers. You need to. People don't want to read a play-by-play. So I think that can work against you. It certainly can be an advantage, like if you do it right. But I think as most of us consume a lot of media, that definitely serves well. And just finding for you, like whether it be in cinema or fiction, finding what works for you. Like I am a huge fan of like Japanese samurai movies, and like I think those are a great example of how that so much action can be conveyed with like very little movement. Like most of those fights, in the ones I like at least, are just like, and that's actually how realistically one would expect like a samurai showdown to happen. Is it's just like all the tension. It's like a storm is coming, and like it's all about that like one like quick movement, and then someone is dead or sliced in half. Like in an anime, their body is just like completely separated. But I think that illustrates really well how it's not necessarily about like describing, like of course in medieval like armored combat, I would think there's more, just the nature of that combat is there's a lot more movement and action as opposed to just armored combat. But still, even that sort of thing, I think when it's really well done, it's not about like every single movement. Now with martial arts and unarmed combat, like sometimes I'll be more descriptive when it calls for it, and sometimes less descriptive and more focus on the characters like inner, like what they're feeling and the stakes. Again, I think it really depends on what the scene is.
Dude, I'm rereading the Lone Wolf and Cub comic book series right now.
Yeah,
and this is like, yeah, you referenced it in terms of like Murray from the Combat Codes is kind of like a lone wolf character and everything like that.
I love that. That's my favorite trope.
Yeah, it's up there for me for sure too.
Right,
yeah.
but Geralt and Ciri and Mandalorian and Grogu, and there's so many of them, so many good examples.
But the way that you describe
like
the way that you describe like the efficiency of the combat in something like that, it's like you get that from. I feel like that's just more of a general kind of like approach of Japanese media, where it's like their combat history, the way it has been applied in their media, is very realistic, and it's like the tension is so integral, the emotion and the ability to, as you described, is kind of like one of these fundamentals of really good action scenes is stakes, and the ability to use tension to build up the stakes and to get the reader or the viewer like more invested in like, holy shit, like something's gonna happen, like the dam is about to burst. And when it comes to something like Lone Wolf and Cub, it's literally just like pages of build up. It's like Dragon Ball too. Like, like 5 episodes of build up, and then you're like, when the fuck is he gonna fight Majin Buu? And then it's like, and when it finally happens, shit just erupts, and it's like brutal, and it's efficient, and it's super. It's over almost faster than you can even perceive it. But
right, and I also, I mean, on the flip side of the coin, like I love, and something I take from a lot, actually is real, like mixed martial arts bouts, like UFC or Bellator, and like, so that's one example. And then like films that depicts, like Rocky is one of, like Rocky 1, or actually Rocky 1 to 4, and the Creed movies are pretty good too. But like the way that, and those, so for the example of like real fights, if you, first of all, the difference between, in my opinion, like when I'm like, I can appreciate the technique of just watching two fighters, and like I'll watch it and really enjoy it. Like if it's just like a really good fight, I'll enjoy it. It'll be fun. It's like a sporting event. This is great. But the ones that I really get invested in are the ones where fully know the backstory of the two fighters. Like they've done all the promo stuff, and maybe it's marketing. They've built it up to some extent. They've done like the embedded where they go to their like families, and that's why they do it. They're building. That's what they're doing. They're building stakes. They're showing their families. They're showing their training and how much they've lost and invested in their upbringing. They're coming up from nothing, or whatever that storyline is. That's if like UFC or any of these big boxing or whatever it might be, if they just showed the fights, like the viewership would be like, at the end of the day, even people that are fight fans, like, yeah, I'll turn on a fight and I don't know anything about it, I'll watch it. But it's right. that's more akin to like the laser blasters, like, oh, this is fun and I can appreciate the technique. And like maybe if it's like a really, really good fight, like you actually start getting invested, even not knowing the characters based on what's happened so far in the fight. Like, oh, he like was really losing and he's the underdog, and you start building it up in your head. Like
right,
your brain
you're creating your own story. Yeah.
You're like, oh, that guy's the underdog. Shit, I really want that guy to win. And the same goes for like if you watch a movie like Rocky. So those are less the opposite of like samurai movies where like, Rocky's getting punched like 1,000 times, right? Like constantly, but like through that, it's like they're building the stakes in the actual fight. They've already built the stakes throughout the movie with all the back characters, and like, Drago killed, Creed and his friends, but the actual fight, that montage of the fight, they're able to really build up the tension within the actual fight. They're using that as an extra tool, even though it's not quick. Right, those fights are not usually nothing but quick, but they're still able to do that really well. And I think with combat codes, because that's unarmed combat, and really to some extent unarmed combat can be pretty fast, but if there's two fairly trained people, it's gonna go to some distance, right? And but you can build the tension through that by having ups and downs and creating an underdog or creating a sense of unease with readers or viewers.
Yeah, I love this. I feel like we're dancing around a topic I really want to dive into, and that's pacing. So like, you've talked a lot about building tension and a fight sequence that is quick versus one that drags on because it's two really skilled fighters. And I feel like regardless of how long the fight is, pacing is still crucial. And so I'm curious about your tips for mastering the pacing in action, and then like I feel like how you capture the feel and flow of actual combat and like using language to present that on the page while still keeping the pacing moving at a clip that's going to keep people engaged.
Yeah. I think an author that does that really well on both ends of the spectrum. I like Joe Abercrombie does that really well in his combat sequences, because he has sequences that are like on like the samurai side that are like so fast and quick. And then he has some fights that are really drawn out, like a whole book. I don't want to give spoilers, but like some of the one-on-one fights are like pretty lengthy, but he does such a good job in keeping you like glued to what's happening. And I haven't like thoroughly analyzed it, but I've thought about it a bit and like what he does and what I try to do. I think you have to be in the fight and also get a reader, whether it's first person or third person, in the fighter's head. But you can't. I actually think you can't stay in too much. I think there's like a threshold of how much you can be in the head. So I think you have to then pace it by like zooming back out to like whatever the environment is to some extent. So it could be like the circle of people that are like, let's say it's like a street fight or between like someone trying to mug someone on the street, and there's like a bunch of people that are watching. So you like might zoom out to the characters that are watching the fight and like create some of the stakes with that perspective. So I'll do that, like whether it's like a gladiatorial fight, like not, I guess the equivalent with film would be like, showing the faces of the spectators to some extent. You don't need to actually do that, show the faces of the spectator, but somehow coming outside the fight, and that actually will create some more stakes to know that, yes, because if you're just in one person's head the whole fight, like, oh, and then I was worried that they were going to do this, and I felt this pain, and then my arm broke, and it was agonizing, whatever that is, I think that also is, it's almost as bad as just, at the light, going back to the blaster, our blaster phenomenon of just like, constant action with no going into someone's head. So I think you have to constantly go between, of course, the actual action, which is a description of the physical movements to some extent, and then you're going into the person's head, and again, that could be through dialogue or some sort of internal monologue, and then coming even all the way out to I don't want to say eagle eye perspective, because again, you don't have to describe the whole arena, but
it all depends on POV as well.
Yeah.
Right, something that will take them further out. So I like to switch between those three, and again, it doesn't have to be like boom, 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 like the exact same intervals, but to some extent. I think
it almost reminds me of the not like avoiding getting into talking heads when you're doing dialogue, right? It's like almost like the flip side of that, where it's like you also don't want to just describe the action. You want to ping pong around and make sure you're holistically describing the scene. Yeah.
Right.
And then building on top of that, it's like, okay, so you're within an action scene itself, and the way that you can use language to control that and control the flow and control the perspective as well. And I like the idea of like, yeah, you're going between like the actions and the movements themselves with dialogue or internality and I guess you could call it like environmental perspective as well. Not necessarily like omniscient narrator or anything like that.
Right,
like God
right.
just appears and decides to describe some shit. But beyond an action scene as an individual entity within a story, how might you be able to use pacing and use an action scene to control the flow and pacing of the overall story? It's like you have an action scene within a chapter, and you might have like a chapter that acts as more of a peak in the pacing, and then using action scenes to create this like ebb and flow that keeps people engaged but doesn't necessarily overwhelm them.
Right. So I think it's a great question. I think it is important to clarify that I think action sequences get a bad rap in that they're all grouped into one category, and I think they actually can be used. Like, I think the most typical way action sequences are used effectively is related to stakes, and it's kind of like, I like to think about it like a building storm, and then the action sequence releases the tension. It's like some sort of climax within the narrative of, maybe there's these two characters that have been feuding, and then you have them fight, and that somehow creates a resolution or creates more tension for the next part of the narrative. But what I like to do, and I actually think can be fairly effective, and I've seen some other authors do it well, I've seen Sanderson do it, is using action sequences as like, I don't want to say as in between sequences. Like, so here, let me give an example. Like, I like to have sequences where, maybe it'll be a training sequences between two friends, and it'll actually help, create some sort of build on the relationship between those two people. And that actually is a place where dialogue can be used really well. Because it's very believable if you have two training partners of any sense. I know, like, Sanderson did it in Stormlight, like with Dalinar, training some of his men, and like more of a, usually this would be found in more of a friendly environment, training environment, but I think it could be done in more of a hostile environment as well. But it's easier to integrate dialogue in this sort of sequence, and that also, because dialogue can be used in those sort of sequence, I think it can be really effective, because dialogue by itself, so this is like the flip side of the coin. Like, how can you make dialogue better? And often the answer is like, you need to make the character doing something, and that's often like what actors will do is like give them something to do to make it believable instead of just talking. Like if you just watch actors, like student film actors, that's like what often happens. The problem is they're just like reciting lines back and forth at each other. So like
Right.
this works for dialogue as well as action, and I really like to do it, and can be like this in between type of scene that you can build character relationships, but at the same time use action in a way that makes it interesting and like keeps along the it can like I know Evan Winter does it really well in his Rage of Dragons series. I really like how he does it in some of the training sequences. Again, that's kind of like the most the place where it's easiest to do this sort of action sequence. But I think overall, I feel like it's a little underutilized because I find it such an effective tool to both solve the dialogue problem as well as an action, not a problem, but like create some action.
Yeah, an action deficit maybe.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I want to dive into that a little bit more because I do think that action scenes can provide a really ideal vehicle, let's say, for character development, plot development, world building, even. And so, like, we've talked about the training montage. Another one for me that comes to mind immediately is the like standard, like romantasy, like the two love interests are sparring and then there's the tense moment, right? Like, and it's a trope because it's effective, right?
Right.
I'm curious if there's any other like uh things that come to mind, maybe specifically for world building, or anything that you remember using when you were creating the combat codes that did that kind
like
of double
I
duty.
for sure. Like I always have a tough time, and I think a lot of authors do, entering and exiting scenes. That's just a tough, like once you're in the middle of a scene, I find, you can hit your flow, but like entering and exit scenes are always hard. Like, and a lot of people will rely on dialogue, and it's a very effective tool. Like you start your scene with like a line of dialogue, and that is a great way. But I've found that another way you can interchangeably is use action. Like in my specific to my world, I might have like a character on their own, like hitting a heavy bag, and like so that action immediately provides something for the reader to latch onto, as opposed to just like describe the standard, which is fine, but like describing a room, like
Right.
this is the room that these characters are
I just
in.
happen to be standing here and staring into space.
Right, and it's like,
To be fair, I do that a lot.
You're a very contemplative individual, Mallory.
Yes.
But it's like cinematic. Like if you were watching a movie,
Yeah.
like that's how it happened. Like you hear the clank of the heavy bag jumping as the fighter lands a kick, and then he's sweating and maybe taking out some sort of angry frustration from a previous scene on the bag, and then another character walks in and go from there. But I find that can be useful. But again, I think action scenes almost there's so many different sizes and shapes and forms that action sequences as a whole can take place. So we're not just talking about giant battles, or one-on-one martial arts fights, or sword duels. We're talking like an assassin running across a roof, jumping from roof to roof, and like that's a setup, or as I said, like a entry to a character dialogue. So they really come in, I feel like, so many shapes, and they're very effective. Action in general.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue for. I want to touch on dialogue again, because one of my author friends who's in my writing group, we were kind of getting into this one chapter of my book where there's basically like a power struggle in the form of this dialogue between a daughter and her father. And she told me this is an action scene. It's just dialogue between these two characters, but it is an action scene. It is an action scene because they are each vying for the dominant position in this argument. And so I'm curious to get your take on this in terms of like how readers might perceive subconsciously certain things, where it's like we as writers might actively say like, okay, I need to approach this argument from the perspective of an action scene. I need to have the right kind of pacing to it. I need to have stakes. I need to have a struggle for power and everything like that a good action scene can have. And then from a reader's perspective, they might just be like, I'm reading this and this is an argument between a father and a daughter. And they might not subconsciously understand that it's like, no, this is an action scene, but it just doesn't take the shape that you necessarily identify as an action scene. Do you want to kind of dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I to go back to the same analogy, which I keep coming back to, which is like the Star Wars blasters just flying through space. I think a dialogue done poorly gives that same effect. It's just like you're reading it or you're listening to it or watching it on a show, and you're just like, you literally are not even listening to the words because there's no stakes and there's no, as you said, power. There's no power dynamic, which would be in any conversation, or even in a very calm, jovial conversation that's friendly. There's still got to be some sort of point someone is trying to get across, and that's going to create some sort of power dynamic. Again, it can be so subtle; it doesn't have to be like a very visceral power dynamic. But I do think I always just keep coming back to that feeling of when you watch dialogue and something is off, or you read dialogue and you just glaze over it, and it's because there's no stakes, right? And there's nothing. You're not caring. You don't care how either character comes out, whether they come out on top or bottom, whether they've gotten their point across, whether they have won, whether they're hurt emotionally, and then of course action sequence physically. And then I think on that point, most dialogue does physically also have action, right? And I think that's a good point. It's like especially in an emotional dialogue, I think a mistake would be to not have physical action because there's zero. I'm just thinking about like my toddler and like how much physical like when when shit's going down, like how much physicality there is, almost more than the actual words. And that of course is with a toddler, they don't have the words, but like even any person that's getting upset or passionate or whatever, it's like that's where the body starts to like just do all sorts of crazy stuff. So I think they're so closely intertwined.
And Jay, I saw your face.
Agree.
It's like body does some crazy stuff.
Like, well, no, but I mean, like, it's a good point though, because like, when's the last time you had like a passionate argument with someone, and like, I feel like honestly, like, that could be like a good character moment too. If they're not doing anything, that person's a fucking psychopath, right? Because like, you would be emoting visibly.
Yeah, right, or pacing. Like I know when I'm in an argument, I'm like standing up, sitting down, I'm walking around all over. It's like your body has all this energy.
I'm usually just crying if I'm.
Yeah,
I'm an angry crier, right? Like I'm one of those.
Well, that's the action.
Like a fucking toddler.
I am. I'm just an angry toddler. I don't have the words. Oh, that's great. Well, to wind down, I have kind of a fun one, and I feel like I know the answer to the question, so I'm going to make it harder.
Oh, great.
So it's just, what's your favorite type of action sequence to write? But I'm going to take 1v1 hand combat out of the equation. So like, if you have to pick between like a chase scene, a larger battle, right? Like, what is your or even we'll add weapons. You can have a 1v1 with weapons. I'll throw you that bone if that's a favorite.
I mean, this is so it can't be 1v1, or it can be. Well, I'm gonna plug my own.
It can't be like, I was gonna say like a 1v1, like just fighting with
So I'm going to plug my own book
Best.
here in that it's a dystopian kind of lo-fi futuristic. Like if you've ever played Final Fantasy VI, like with Magitech kind of things, and it's specific to that game, if you've ever played Final Fantasy VI, there's like these like mech suits, and so Combat Codes has, and so we've gotten some like tension created in the first book where this cast of Grievar, who are the fighters that are fighting for everyone else, they are kind of subservient to this upper caste, the daimyo, who have access to all this technology, and in specific, they have access to these like kind of mech suits of various. There's all sorts of various mech suits, which of course give them a massive upper hand over any. Despite how good these Grievar are at martial arts, and they have physical attributes, they're far inferior to this technology. But in the first book, we're setting up a lot of tension, especially with one of the main characters, Murray, and his kind of hatred of technology and these mechs. So definitely, we're setting up for the second and third books some pretty badass standoffs between man versus machine battles.
Oh my God, I love it.
And I really love writing those because it's such an imbalance of strength and power. And so what needs to go into that. And then it's also to go back to stakes, like we're really representing symbolically, all the hatred of technology, as well as like the code of honor to not use technology, and putting that into physical combat action scenes.
It's like in the Matrix where they start fighting the machines. And it's like,
yes,
so vastly outmatched.
Yes,
that sounds incredible. I'm excited. Ooh, I can't wait.
Well, I've had the pleasure of reading the whole trilogy in self-pub, but I'm like, dude, what are you going to add to
there's things coming.
What are you gonna add to that shit? Oh, I'm so excited. All right, buddy. Well, do you have any final pieces of advice for writers out there looking to perfect their action scenes or tackle action in a way that they never have before?
Right. I would definitely say you don't need to be a martial artist, like research is good, but I think actually even research, if you're a consumer of media, like movies or film or TV or books, think about what really works for you. Like, what do you love? What are the scenes that you love? And then think about what happens in that. Like, do you love Gladiator? Where Maximus is saying, "Are you not entertained?" And like, what about that scene? Like, is it the stakes? Is it the pacing of that scene? Of course, it's just like a very badass scene, but like, what about that scene or any of those specific scenes? Or if you're a fan of like Abercrombie or George R.R. Martin writes great action sequences as well, like some of those duels. Like, what makes it really good for you? So that's how I would kind of like reverse engineer what works for you, and then try to replicate that to some extent.
Yeah.
And
as writers, is like we gotta write for ourselves first, and then the audience.
Well, and that's the thing. Like the type of action you enjoy is probably gonna dovetail with the rest of the book. You know what I mean? And you're gonna find readers that are readers like you.
I love low stakes action, MJ. Take out all the fucking tension. No.
Perfect. I'm just gonna have people just go around punch each other for no reason. It's gonna
just hatchets just appearing out of the blue.
Oh, hatchets! You gotta watch Warrior, MJ.
Yeah.
I do. I know. I literally wrote it down on a sticky note on my desk while we were talking, so I watch it.
Yeah, the actor that does all the hatchets, his name is Jason Tobin. He's really good.
You're gonna be
like
very
it.
happy, MJ.
Gotta check it out.
The hatchets on your tricep are gonna tingle.
Yes.
Fucking sentient tattoo.
Can't wait.
All right. Well, that's it for this mini masterclass and our two-parter with Alex. Thank you again for taking the time to chat with us and kick it ass as always.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. It's been a blast.
Absolute pleasure, man. As well, for anyone who contributes to our Patreon at $10 or more a month, there'll be an exclusive reading by Alex from the Combat Code, so go check that out and go pick up the book. It'll already be in stores by the time this episode is out. So go check that out and support what he does as an author. And Alex, where can people find you on social media?
It's at Combat Codes across all the different socials.
Perfect. And you can also follow SFF Addicts on Instagram and Twitter at sffaddictspod, or you can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. MJ, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all at MJ Kuhn Books, and then mjkuhn.com.
Fantastic. And Thick as Thieves is out on July 25th. Support authors, pre-order their stuff, because pre-orders go a long way. So
True story.
that's it for this.
Yeah.
That's it for this week. Now, keep reading, keep imagining, and see you next time on SFF Addicts.